So a few weeks ago, I posted a video about how you can improve your running this winter, but that was a bit more of a generalized cover-all basis. However, one thing I didn't cover is how much your body type can impact the way that you run. So if you're perhaps a little bit on the larger side, shout out to all my thicker runners out there, and you might find running a little bit more difficult, then stick around as this video is for you. Now, when I'm talking about being a heavier runner, I'm not just talking about those that are perhaps a little bit overweight, but also those that are perhaps coming from a weightlifting, gym, sporting background. And if you have a bigger frame like myself or my YouTube friend Mark Lewis, who's spoken openly about how difficult it was for him getting into running at 250 pounds and 6'6", then there's going to be a lot of points that we're going to cover today that apply to you. I think generally from a young age we're conditioned to believe that there is one body type of runner and there is an ideal that we should all aim to look like if we are going to be running, whereas that's valid if you're looking to compete at the Olympic Games, but for most of us that aren't, it can leave us feeling quite confused. However, does that mean if you're a little bit on the thick side that you shouldn't be running? No, absolutely not. So for context, I've consistently hovered around the 200 to 215 pounds mark for the best part of 10 years, and I've ran thousands of kilometers in a variety of environments. And along the way, I picked up some PBs that I'm pretty proud of. My longest run ever is 100 miles in just over 22 hours and 15 minutes. My best 5K time at this body weight is 17:37. My best marathon, which was actually a sort of training run rather than a best effort, was 3 hours and 17 minutes. Perhaps I'll try and beat that in 2023, watch this space. And my best mile time was 4 minutes and 58 seconds, and that was in the same day as a 500-pound back squat. So just because you're not genetically inclined to be a world-class runner, and you might not necessarily look like one, that doesn't mean that you can't get out there and smash some PBs of your own. So the mistake that most people make is going far too hard, far too soon. It's very important to start steadily, build your volume, and not dive in head first. Running is a skill, which means it's going to take time to develop it, learn how to move efficiently, and adjust to the fatigue that comes from it, which is why it's so important to have a plan. I am biased as we do program and supply training plans, and if you use the code YT2023, you can get yourself 20% off our Omni Performance training plans, top link in the description down below, and get the new year started off real nice. Secondly are the practical considerations, and the one that comes up the most when having this conversation is chafing. You'll never catch me without an inner lining on my running shorts, and whether you grab yourself a pair like these, which are the Gymshark Speed 2-in-1 shorts, or you get some sort of undershorts that you place underneath an existing pair of shorts without a lining, whatever you can do to stop the chafing is a very important thing to get ahead of before it's too late. Second to that is chamois cream, and I was going to bring some and hold it right here, but I've actually ran out as it's been so long since I've done a long bike ride. I didn't realise until we were prepping for this video that I'd ran out. So imaginary chamois cream is basically anti-friction. It's what Tour de France cyclists use, and it is your best friend when it comes to long endurance training as a larger bloke. Next up is trail bags. If you're going to be going out for longer runs and you have a slightly larger upper body than most, then there'll be certain brands that suit you better. I've always found Osprey Duro 6 and 15 to suit me, as you'll have seen over the years. I tried some Salomon bags and they didn't quite really fit around my back or shoulders, so I'm not really giving any recommendations here other than to shop around and find what fits your frame, because these are generally designed to suit the frame of conventional shaped runners. Finally, on practical considerations is hydration and nutrition in general terms. As you are heavier than the average runner, the prescriptions you'll find that are generalized online for how much you should be eating, how much sodium you should be taking on when running long distances, might not be specific to you. So I'd recommend a sweat test first and foremost, which you can do through different organizations throughout the UK or in the States. But more importantly, I'd encourage you to play around with your sodium intake, your nutrition and hydration intakes on longer runs, on bigger sessions, and take notes of how you respond to certain things so that you can find what works for you rather than what works for generalized populations in forums online. You've got more body weight to consider, you've got higher heat dissipation to consider, and you have more energy expenditure to consider, so you need to account for those. Okay, so thirdly is understanding and analysing your technique, as the name of the game with running is efficiency. And I know for a fact through my experience that one small change in your efficiency over time can pay huge dividends further down the line. If you're coming at this from a lifting background, you'll know that moving weight through an inefficient movement pattern is making you developed in a range of motion, in a motor pattern that isn't going to be conducive to long-term top-end strength. So it's the exact same premise here. We want to get a technique nailed, and then we can build from the ground upwards and adapt our training and our energy systems so that we can become fitter, more robust individuals over time. So it's 100% something to be aware of, be conscious of, take the time to understand, and adjust over time. At your ideal stride length and cadence, you'll be able to run at the same pace with reduced heart rate and oxygen consumption. That reduced heart rate and oxygen consumption would lead to a lower energy cost and effort whilst running. It also helps protect you from injury through effective movement patterns. One of the most common injuries in runners is patellofemoral pain or runner's knee, and that's very common when you have just a slight tendency to overstride, which we'll cover shortly. Even if it's not very obvious, your knee is more extended when your foot hits the ground, so your leg is straighter and further in front of you. The force from the ground pushes back up through your body in that position can lead to increased risk of patellofemoral pain. Generally speaking, the biggest risk for injury with running comes from overstriding, but what does that actually look like? Well, as you can see here, my heel is landing out in front of my body, and that is something that we are wanting to avoid. Here is an example of the sort of impact point that we should be looking for, and I'll hold my hands up and say that my running technique is far from perfect, but it is much improved over the years. As you can see, the impact point is directly below my hips and shoulders, and that allows for a more efficient movement pattern over time. So if you're overstriding and you're wearing a pair of Vivos or barefoot shoes, you're very quickly going to feel uncomfortable as you're landing on the ground, whereas conventional running shoes allow the cushioning to disguise that perception, that feeling. So by getting in a pair of barefoot shoes and going for some strides, some varied paced running, you'll quickly feel how you're interacting with the ground and be more conscious of your stride. And finally, you'll often have heard me talk about Zone 2 training on this channel before, and that is for good reason, as it is essentially the foundation of all fitness. If you're wondering at this point, Fergus, what on earth is Zone 2 training? Well, it is essentially the heart rate zone that allows us to work on our aerobic capacity, and that underpins our ability to adapt and tolerate volume across the board. So as we mentioned earlier, if you're the sort of person that's going to go and send it for their first run in years or ever and think I'm going to go sub 20 on this 5 kilometers, then you might well be one of the people in lockdown that ended up tearing your calf and lining the bank accounts of physiotherapists all over the world, yes, but very much undermining the integrity of your lower limbs. So with that in mind, it's important to build steadily, start slowly, and accumulate more and more volume, and then start adding in pacier work, start going for 5 kilometer PBs, start doing 800 meters on tracks like this one, and then building from there, essentially. So how do you determine that you're in Zone 2? There's 3 ways I'd recommend for you to consider. So number 1 is you can have a sports watch which monitors your heart rate, or you can sync it up to a heart rate strap from your chest, and you can set your zones and work within them. Number 2 is the talk test. So if you're out on a run with a friend, or you're in a less populated part of the world where you can just talk out loud as you run, then you can make an educated guess that you're within Zone 2 and working aerobically because you're still able to maintain a conversation. And number 3, which is nasal breathing, which effectively acts as a form of throttle control, whereby if you're only breathing through your nose, you're essentially regulating your pace so that you're staying within an aerobic one and building from there, like so. And there we have it. There are 4 overarching considerations if you are over 200 pounds and wanting to get into running, or you're looking to improve within that weight category. So I hope that's been informative. That's sort of my perspective on having sat at this body weight for a long time and training across a variety of disciplines. So if it has been, then please don't forget to drop a like down below. Comment your thoughts, feelings or experiences if there's any insights that you're willing to share, and please do make sure to hit the subscribe button, as we would really appreciate it, and it makes the broader team behind myself and the channel go like this. Cheers. So with that in mind, I want to thank you all very much for watching, and I will see you next time.